Some afternoons in Portland are so gentle that you think nothing bad could possibly happen. Sunlight, thin as honey, spills over the wooden porch, and the breeze drifts through the rows of pink geraniums I've tended for the past 8 years. And in that small beige house, the one I proudly call a love story built from savings and chronic back pain, I was standing there, holding a bag of carrots, feeling as peaceful as if the whole world had gone to sleep. My name is Grace Miller. I am 58, a former elementary school teacher. I once taught children how to spell, share cookies fairly, and say thank you at the right moments. I used to think those small lessons would somehow protect me from heartbreak. But no. Life always finds a way to hand you an advanced level course, especially when you think you've retired. This house was my life's work. After my husband Hank passed away too soon, I worked double shifts, taught night classes, and saved every penny so that my son, Ethan, my only child, could have a stable home. When he married Tina, I didn't hesitate to say, "Move in, kids. The house is big enough. I'll take the small room." I used to think this home was a monument to motherly devotion. It turns out it was a one-way ticket to temporary lodging. That afternoon, I had just come back from the market, arms full of carrots, apples, and toasted bread. In the living room stood Ethan, tall, serious, and suddenly distant. The late sunlight streamed through the window, falling across his face. Handsome, yes, but cold, like a statue carved from marble. Before I could even say, "I bought the carrots you like," he looked straight at me, his voice as hard as the kitchen counter. "Mom, I'm tired of seeing you here every day." Tina feels the same. We want our own space. I froze. My fingers gripped the plastic handles so tightly they dug into my skin. I heard every word clear and sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking. I thought maybe I'd misheard him. I taught for 30 years. I know students sometimes misspeak, but not this time. The answer was correct, just wrong in every possible way. Still smiling, I asked, "What did you say, Ethan?" "Tina and I think you should find another place. I want my own life." Ah, so that's what it was. If this were a movie, the camera would zoom in slowly on my face, tears rolling down while some tragic violin swelled in the background. But my life isn't a drama, and I don't have the patience for tragedy. I looked at him, nodded, and only one thought ran through my mind. I used to teach second graders how to use polite words. Clearly, Ethan skipped class that day. He stood there, waiting for a reaction. Maybe he thought I'd scream, throw a wooden spoon, or run to my room crying. Instead, I set the carrots on the table, brushed my hands off, and said calmly, "Oh, I see. So where exactly would you like me to go?" "You can find your own place. You have money." That second line, if anyone's asking, could be called the finishing blow. I sat down, looking around the living room I'd cleaned every morning, the one where I'd placed fresh flowers every Sunday. Everything suddenly looked as if it belonged to someone else. A part of me wanted to ask, "Did you forget who paid for this house?" But I didn't. There's no point arguing with someone whose heart has already turned cold. When Ethan went upstairs, I got up and poured myself a cup of chamomile tea. Tea, I've found, is the one thing on earth that never betrays you. Its scent filled the room. Calm, gentle, the perfect opposite of the ache in my chest. I took the first sip, closed my eyes, and murmured, "Grace Miller, this is your chance to prove you're still an excellent teacher. When a student says something foolish, don't shout. Just teach again, by example." Outside the window, the wind brushed through the geraniums. I'd planted them the year Ethan graduated from college, the year I thought life is blooming. Now, looking at them, I realized flowers can bloom again, but feelings don't always get that luxury. I remembered the evenings when Tina complained, "Mom, you leave too many things in the kitchen." "You teach that neighbor's kid to sing too loudly." "You played jazz in the mornings." Back then, I'd just laughed, thinking she was tired. Now I understood. They'd probably been plotting my graceful eviction for months. The truth is, the hardest part isn't being told to leave. It's realizing your love has become inconvenient. But instead of crying, I laughed. Quietly, just enough to make the neighbor's cat look at me through the window, concerned. I said softly, to no one in particular, "All right, my dear son. You want space? I'll give you the sky. But I, too, need freedom." I set down the teacup, pulled out my notebook, and began writing the first page of The Liberation of Grace Miller. 1. Don't let emotions overrule logic. 2. Don't let kindness become someone's entitlement. 3. Don't walk away empty-handed. And underline the final line. If someone says they're tired of seeing you every day, disappear with style. I smiled. I didn't yet know where I was going, but one thing was certain. That day, my son had accidentally done something magnificent. He gave me a reason to begin again. And like any teacher who's ever given homework, I knew every lesson needs practice. Maybe it was time I started Freedom 101. I washed the dishes, tidied the kitchen, placed a few new geraniums in the vase, and then sat by the window. The sunset fell over my graying hair, but I didn't feel sad, just different. As if someone had flipped a switch to a new chapter of my life. I took the last sip of tea, looked at the golden sky, and smiled. Today, my son may have lost a housekeeper, but I found myself again. And I knew, somewhere in Portland's soft wind, a new beginning was already waving hello. That evening, Portland was draped in a thin, misty rain, the kind that feels like someone is gently testing the patience of your old umbrella. I sat in the living room, swirling my teacup between my palms. The soft yellow lamplight reflected on the wooden walls, making the house look almost suspiciously peaceful. It was, in fact, the perfect night to plan a perfectly legal crime. I dialed Maggie, my best friend of 15 years, owner of a little bookshop tucked on the corner of Hawthorne Street. Her voice came through, husky and warm, like a glass of red wine at the end of a long day. "Grace, it's not even that late, but you already sound like you're about to commit a felony." I laughed, pronouncing each word slowly and clearly. "Mag, I'm about to do the craziest thing I've ever done, and it's completely legal." She burst out laughing, the kind of laugh that probably startled her sleeping cat on the bookstore counter. "You're going to divorce your son, aren't you?" I laughed out loud. If the law allowed it, I would, but no, I'm divorcing the house. A pause. Then Maggie's voice dropped, surprised. "You mean sell it?" "Exactly. Sell it fast, sell it quietly. Then I'll disappear, like the most peaceful speck of dust in all of Portland." There was silence on the other end for a few beats. I imagined Maggie sipping her tea with that little smirk she wears whenever she approves of my mischief. "Grace Miller, I always thought you were a saint of patience. Turns out, you're a strategist in disguise." I shrugged, even though she couldn't see me. People say silence is golden. But in this case, silence is a property deed with my name on it. The next morning, I put on my old moss-green coat, still holding its shape after all these years, and spritzed a bit of citrus perfume, the scent that makes me feel like a woman stepping into a new chapter. I went to the office of Mr. Harper, the real estate agent Maggie had once described as the man who sells houses faster than a microwave timer. Harper was in his 40s, tall with salt and pepper hair and a practiced, courteous smile. He looked at me with polite curiosity, the kind reserved for women who don't look desperate but are clearly up to something unexpected. "Mrs. Miller, what can I do for you today?" I sat down, opened my notebook, and said evenly, "I want to sell my house on Southwest Maple Drive as quickly as possible, quietly. Cash, if we can swing it." His brows rose. "Are you sure?" That property's in great condition. The value keeps rising. Selling in a rush might mean a loss. I smiled, voice calm but edged with irony. I bought that house with love. Now I'm selling it with logic. A small loss for long-term peace. For once, my goodbye doesn't need a tragic soundtrack. Harper chuckled and began jotting notes on his clipboard. Sounds like a movie line, Mrs. Miller. But I like it. Do you have the ownership documents ready? I pulled out a brown envelope and placed it on the table. Right here. Original papers. No mortgage, no disputes, no emotional debts attached. He glanced through them and nodded. Perfect. I already have a few clients looking for a home in that area. If you're comfortable proceeding, I can probably close within a week. A week? Perfect. In the meantime, just think of me as a friendly ghost still haunting the place. Don't let anyone suspect a thing. Harper smiled. I like your style. So do I, finally. That afternoon, I went home feeling lighter than air. I wasn't the mother who'd been kicked out. I was the strategist about to make her best move. Tina had just come home from work, her perfume thick in the living room. She smiled faintly. You bought too much food again, Mom. We'll never finish it. I only smiled and replied softly while pouring my tea. Don't worry. Someone else will be eating with me soon enough. She didn't get it, just shrugged and walked upstairs. I watched her go and thought, enjoy it while you can, sweetheart. You've got maybe 5 quiet days left. I sat down and opened my notebook, the one now titled Operation Portland Freedom. Day 1. Met Harper. Contract nearly ready. Maintain normal behavior. Smile at the right moments. Stay silent at the crucial ones. Remember, the sharpest revenge needs no knife, only a smile. That night, I stepped out into the garden. The geraniums were heavy with rain, their scent earthy and bittersweet. I snipped a few stems, placed them in a glass jar, and asked myself, Grace, are you being reckless or brilliant? I chuckled. Probably both. Inside, Ethan and Tina were watching a movie, their laughter mixing with the music. I watched quietly. Not angry, not bitter, just strangely detached. I used to love that sound, used to think, if Ethan's happy, I'm happy too. But some kinds of laughter teach you one thing. You don't belong there anymore. I refilled my teacup and whispered to myself, It's all right, Grace. You've taught hundreds of children how to read. Now it's time to teach yourself how to read. Life again. The next morning, I woke early, opened the window, and let the wind rush in. I brewed coffee, turned on the radio, and there it was. Here Comes the Sun. The very song Hank used to hum when we painted the house together. Yes, I murmured, the sun really is coming. Inside me, there was no rage, no resentment, only the calm certainty of a woman who finally knows what she must do. I called Harper to confirm. Go ahead, and don't tell anyone. He replied, Trust me, Mrs. Miller. 1 more week, and that house will have a new owner. I smiled, gazing out at the garden, which glowed in the sunlight. Good. When that happens, my son will learn a valuable lesson. Never evict the person who's paying for your roof. I closed my notebook, took a sip of coffee. It was bitter, but the kind of bitterness that feels earned. It felt like signing a contract with my own future, not as the endlessly giving mother, but as the new version of me. Grace Miller, the woman who smiled when they threw her out and turned heartbreak into the finest form of art. Ever since the day I officially signed with Harper, I've been living 2 lives. By day, I was Grace Miller, the sweet, tea-loving mother who cracked harmless jokes to keep the family harmony. By night, I was an undercover agent executing Operation Portland Secret, a top-tier national mission titled Sell the House Without Getting Caught. I called myself Agent 58, after my age, not my fitness level. And honestly, if the CIA ever needs recruits, they should consider middle-aged women who've survived living with picky daughters-in-law. Our patience and emotional camouflage skills could win wars. By daylight, I played my role flawlessly. I cooked, swept the porch, and chatted cheerfully with Tina, acting as though nothing unusual was going on. She didn't suspect a thing. In fact, she even smiled at me one morning. "You seem really happy lately, Mom. You're smiling all the time." I poured her a glass of water, keeping my expression serene. "Oh, I just found a new purpose in life." "What is it?" "Decluttering unnecessary things." She nodded, distracted by her phone. If only she knew I was talking about the entire house, she might have choked on that water. Every night, after 10 p.m., when the house went quiet, I switched personas. Flashlight in hand, I crept through the hall like a stealthy ninja on a mission. I began packing little by little. Wedding photos, old student essays, Ethan's childhood teddy bear. Each item went into one of 3 carefully labeled piles, written in bright pink marker. Take along. The memories worth keeping. Leave behind. Practical items, neutral objects, emotionally irrelevant. Not worth remembering. Which, I'll admit, included a few of Tina's gifts and her binder of clean-eating recipes she tried to convert me with. Then, in the back of the cabinet, I found our old teapot, the one Hank bought when we first married, chipped, scratched, but still carrying the faint scent of chamomile. I looked around, then whispered, "Easy, Hank." The operation's in progress. I slipped it into my suitcase and zipped it shut, grinning. True ninja behavior. No sound, no trace. My heart raced, half from nostalgia, half from thrill. It was exhilarating, like being 20 again. The only difference? Back then, I was sneaking out to meet a boy. Now, I was sneaking out to leave my son. 3 days later, Harper called, excitement in his voice. "Mrs. Miller, I've got a young couple interested in the property. They love classic wooden homes." "Perfect," I said. "Bring them this afternoon. I'll erase all traces of my presence." That morning, I cleaned the house from top to bottom. Not out of sentimentality, but as a strategic move. If I wanted a good price, the house needed to whisper cozy, not occupied by an unwanted mother. I placed a vase of fresh geraniums on the table and baked a batch of apple pies to fill the air with a comforting aroma. A trick I'd picked up from a home-selling show. If the house smells like pie, buyers will think it's happy. Standing in the kitchen, watching the butter sizzle, I thought, synthetic happiness still counts if it sells. At 3 p.m. sharp, Harper arrived with a young couple, both around 30. The wife wore a mustard yellow coat and smiled as if she had seen sunlight for the first time. The husband, glasses and all, seemed like the type who liked pie, my kind of man. I greeted them with my best hostess smile. "Welcome, please come into my home, at least for now." Harper coughed discreetly and they both laughed. I led the tour, gesturing proudly. This living room has seen over 300 successful apple pies and 12 spectacularly burnt ones. If you can handle the smell of butter, this place is perfect for you. They burst out laughing. The wife squeezed her husband's hand and whispered, "I already love it here." I guided them through the kitchen, the back garden, and the little sunlit nook. I planted these geraniums to remind myself that sometimes the most beautiful things must wither before they bloom again. The wife blinked back emotion. "You're wonderful. This house, it has a soul." I smiled, thinking silently, "Yes, sweetheart. And that soul is about to be free." After the tour, they turned to Harper, their faces glowing with pride. "If Mrs. Miller agrees, we'd like to put down a deposit today." I almost spit out my tea. That was faster than expected. Pretending to stay calm, I set my cup down and asked lightly, "Are you sure? This house has a lot of memories." The husband chuckled. "That's the best part. We'll make new ones." I nodded, hiding my triumphant grin. Harper met my eyes and gave a subtle nod. Mission accomplished. As they left, I stood at the door, waving, "Wishing you both happiness in my soon-to-be former home." The door clicked shut and I dropped into my chair, laughing like a kid who just won a secret game. Turns out selling a house is easier than teaching your son to say thank you. Night Report. Operation Portland Secret. Day 4. Deposit secured. Ethan remains clueless. Tina's busy photographing her lunch for Instagram. Success rate 9 out of 10. Only risk: smiling too much might arouse suspicion. I closed my journal and looked out at the garden. The Portland rain had started again. Soft, steady, rhythmic, like a calm heartbeat. Just a few more steps and I'd be completely free. And for the first time in years, I felt genuinely happy. Not because someone loved me, but because I was falling in love. With my own plan, I used to think that at 58, the hottest thing in my life would be a cup of ginger tea in the morning. But life, with its wicked sense of humor, decided to treat me to something spicier. A live-action thriller far better than anything on Netflix, titled The Good Kids Gone Rogue. And somehow I ended up being the lead actress, unpaid and unprepared. On Monday morning, Harper texted to say the buyers were thrilled and planning to increase their deposit by the weekend. I was about to pour myself some coffee when Tina's shrill voice echoed from the yard. "Ethan!" 2 strangers just came asking about the house. They said it's for sale. Do you know anything about that? Ah, perfect timing. The episode had reached its climax. I stirred my coffee, smiled, and walked out to the porch. Ethan stood in the middle of the yard, his face a stormy shade of red. Somewhere between disbelief, anger, and lack of sleep. "Mom, what's going on? People are saying this house is up for sale." I set my cup down on the wooden table, pulled out a chair, and said evenly, "I'm doing yoga." He blinked. "Yoga? In the yard? Are you kidding me?" I nodded solemnly, pressing my palms together as if in prayer. "Spiritual stillness yoga, sweetheart. I'm practicing not to laugh when someone asks a foolish question." His glare could have melted steel. Tina stood beside him, arms crossed, looking at me with more suspicion than a private investigator in a bad soap opera. "You can't sell this house, it's our home." I opened my eyes and smiled sweetly at her. More accurately, it's my home. "But thank you for caring so much about someone else's property." The silence between us thickened until it could have been sliced with a butter knife. Ethan's lips parted as if to argue, but I stood first and said, "If you want to discuss finances, bring the property deed. You'll see whose name is printed on it. If not, I suggest a glass of orange juice. You look like you're running low on vitamin reason." Then I turned around and walked back into the house, leaving my 2 supporting actors frozen mid-scene, clearly searching for a script that didn't exist. I've always known that young people tend to carry more ego than gratitude. What I didn't expect was that their egos had learned to forge legal documents. 3 days later, my old lawyer, Mr. Davis, the same man who handled the house purchase, called. His voice was calm but firm. "Mrs. Miller, someone's trying to mortgage your property to take out a loan." The applicants are Ethan and Tina. I was trimming flowers when he said it, scissors still in hand, yet my pulse didn't even flicker. "Oh," I said lightly, "another episode. I just hope they're not exhausted pretending to star in a Netflix drama." He chuckled softly. "They attached a power of attorney with your signature." I sipped my tea and replied in a tone as smooth as jazz. "That must be a fake. I never sign anything unless there's tea and apple pie next to me." Davis laughed under his breath, already understanding. "Would you like me to intervene?" "Of course," I said. "Tell the bank the property is solely under my name. And if they want proof, I have the original deed notarized 8 years ago, cleaner than a straight-A student's report card. That afternoon, I pulled out my old box of records, deeds, renovation receipts, even a photo of me signing the original contract. I sorted everything neatly into folders and labeled one in bright red marker, evidence, for when my son forgets who paid for this. Then I scanned the whole stack and emailed it to Davis with a short note. I don't want to sue, but if a moral lesson is needed, I can always return to teaching for a day. Less than an hour later, he called back, "All settled." The bank canceled the transaction. We're also having the forged signature investigated. It could be criminal. I took a slow sip of tea, letting the warmth fill me. Good. I don't want anyone in prison. I just want them to understand the price of forgetting who their mother is. That evening, I cooked dinner like nothing had happened. Pumpkin soup, toasted bread, and strawberry salad. 3 dishes capable of masking the fact that the tension in the air could power half the lights in Portland. Ethan and Tina came down the stairs silently. They looked at each other, then at me. No one spoke. I ladled soup into bowls and smiled. I added some cream this time. It's lovely. Want to try? Ethan nodded. Tina pretended to check her phone. I thought, at least the boy still remembers how to eat before picking a fight. Halfway through the meal, Ethan set down his spoon and said softly but firmly, "Mom, I'm sorry." Maybe we went too far. I met his eyes. Gentle, but steady. "It's all right, son." People go too far when they overbake a pie, but when they forge documents, that's beyond fixing. Tina froze. Ethan turned crimson, lowering his head. I stood, gathering the dishes, and added, "I'm not angry. I've just stopped being naive. Love doesn't mean signing your name away so others can control your life." No one said another word. Only the clinking of silverware broke the silence, like the slow rhythm of a sad jazz song. That night, rain returned to Portland. I sat at my desk under the soft lamplight, opened my leather notebook, and wrote, June 12th, Operation Portland Secret Phase 2. Subjects have begun resisting, but the teacher still maintains control of the classroom. I paused, watching the warm light on my hands, and smiled. I'm no longer the suffering mother. I'm the CEO of Project, the rebirth of a teacher. I closed the notebook and took another sip of tea. It was slightly bitter, but the aftertaste was sweet, exactly like how I felt. Outside, the rain tapped lightly on the porch roof, steady and comforting. I whispered to myself, tomorrow the sky will clear. And if it doesn't, I'll turn on my own sunshine. Because I finally understood something. A woman's strength doesn't come from being needed. It comes from standing tall, brewing her tea, and signing her life back into her own hands. I used to teach my students, when someone throws stones at you, pick them up and build a castle. Today, that lesson came in handy. Only this time, instead of stones, I got a lawsuit. After the forged document fiasco was exposed, Ethan suddenly changed his tone. That evening, he walked into the kitchen while I was rolling out pie crust. The soft yellow light hit his face, the same face I used to kiss goodnight after singing lullabies, and now it was drawn tight like a violin string about to snap. Mom, please stop. Don't sell the house. Tina and I will fix everything, I promise. Just cancel the sale. I kept working the dough, calm as the mixing bowl in front of me. I'm not selling the house to punish anyone, sweetheart. I'm selling it to buy myself some peace. You can't do that. This house is... I cut him off without even looking up. Is the one I bought where you've been living rent-free. Yes, go on. Finish your thought? He froze. Maybe it was the first time he'd ever been out-argued by his own mother. I sighed, dusted the counter, and slid the pie into the oven. Son, if I ever stop, it'll be because I ran out of flour, not because I ran out of reasons. The next morning, Tina came downstairs in her work outfit, heels clicking against the floor like an alarm. I'll be direct, Mother. If you keep pushing the sale, I'll sue you. I looked up from my cup of tea and smiled as though she'd just complimented my outfit. Sue me? Oh, how exciting. I'm not great at lawsuits, dear, but I do bake beautifully when I'm angry, and those pies always come out perfect. She glared. Are you mocking me? Of course not, darling. I'm just using your negative energy to help the dough rise. She stormed off, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. I shrugged, muttering to myself, So hard these days to find anyone who appreciates sophisticated sarcasm. 2 days later, a woman knocked on my door. She wore a navy coat and carried a folder thick enough to hold a novella. "Good afternoon. I'm Nancy Lopez from the Department of Social Services. We've received a report claiming you may be mentally unfit to manage your own affairs." I nearly spat out my chamomile tea, but managed to compose myself in a second flat. "Oh, really? Do come in. Only in Portland could someone care this much about my mental health. Truly touching." Nancy sat down and opened her folder. "I'll need to ask you a few questions and assess your living conditions." "Of course," I said, pouring her a cup of tea. "But have some chamomile first. It's fresh from my garden." "You look like you need it more than I do." She hesitated, then smiled and accepted. I also set out a plate of cookies. "I've heard chamomile tea is good for stress relief. You must drink gallons of it in your line of work." Nancy laughed softly. "You seem remarkably calm about all this." "Oh, I'm fine. Just mildly addicted to coffee and occasionally dances when ABBA comes on, but otherwise mentally stable." Her pen paused midair. She tried not to laugh. "Do you happen to have any recent mental health certifications, Mrs. Miller?" I walked to the cabinet, pulled out a sealed envelope, and handed it over. "Here. From Dr. Mark Taylor. He's put up with me for 10 years. He says I'm perfectly sane, just excessively imaginative." She read it, nodded, and smiled. "Everything checks out. Looks like this report was false." "I suppose my flawless daughter-in-law sent it?" Nancy chuckled, but didn't confirm. Her expression said it all. "I'll close the file today. You're perfectly healthy." "I know." The only one who needs therapy around here is the person who thinks she can outsmart a woman who's taught elementary school for 30 years. Before leaving, Nancy lifted her cup, inhaling the scent of chamomile. It's rare to meet someone who handles this kind of situation with such grace. I shrugged. Calmness is my profession. I once supervised 27 second graders during lunch break. A little false complaint doesn't keep me up at night. She laughed, stood, and shook my hand. "It's been a pleasure, Mrs. Miller. I'll note in the report that you're perfectly sound." "Thank you, dear. And here, take some cookies for the road. If anyone asks, tell them you met the only incompetent woman in Portland who bakes, pays taxes, and still remembers how to use an oven." Nancy burst out laughing and waved goodbye as she stepped outside, her blue coat disappearing behind the maple trees, leaving behind a trail of soft laughter that lingered through the house like the scent of baked sugar. That evening, I turned on ABBA and cranked up the volume. When Dancing Queen filled the kitchen, I poured myself another cup of tea and twirled between the chairs. Outside, a fine Portland drizzle tapped against the windows. I smiled and whispered, "I wonder if Tina plans to file another complaint. If she does, I hope they come around tea time." I sat down with my journal and wrote, June 15th, Operation Portland Secret, Phase 3. The opposition launched a weak counterattack, a baseless lawsuit. The Social Services Department arrived and were served tea and cookies. Result, case dismissed, mood uplifted. Note: consider teaching a class titled Advanced Counterattacks Through Kindness. I leaned back, the lamplight casting a warm glow over my reflection in the window. The tired, wounded woman I once was had vanished. In her place sat someone steady, self-assured, and quietly radiant. Maybe, I wrote in the margin, the best revenge isn't making someone miserable. It's staying happy no matter how hard they try to stop you. I lifted my cup, took a slow sip. The chamomile was light, faintly sweet, exactly like victory, subtle but unmistakable. On the table, the cookie plate still held a few crumbs. I chuckled to myself. Nancy left with the box I gave her. Probably the first time in her career she met a supposedly incompetent woman who could bake and quote tax law. And so, in the soft, rainy night of Portland, I sat there listening to the ticking clock, steady, calm, and perfectly in rhythm with my own heart. No anger, no fear, no bitterness, just peace and the quiet sweetness of chamomile tea. There are mornings when you don't need an alarm, because freedom itself wakes you up. Today was one of those mornings. The Portland sky was a pale blue, clouds drifting like cream stirred lazily into morning sunlight. I brewed my first cup of coffee in the little wooden kitchen that had held so much laughter and so many tears. The aroma of roasted beans mingled with the faint sweetness of old apple pie, carrying with it the taste of memories, sweet, heavy, and ready to be folded neatly into the suitcase of my past. On the table sat a thick folder, clipped neatly around the house sale contract. Harper had texted, "Mrs. Grace, the buyers want to finalize early. They've got the full payment ready." I smiled and sipped my coffee. Perfect. I've got the courage ready too. When Harper arrived, the living room glowed with sunlight. He placed his briefcase on the table, opened the papers, and spoke in his calm, steady tone. "Just sign here, here, and here. Once that's done, the funds will be transferred to your new account." I took the pen and looked around the house one last time. The wall where Ethan once drew a lopsided cat, the old wooden chair where I used to mend socks, the window overlooking the geraniums I planted with trembling hands all those years ago. Everything was quiet now, as if the house itself were waiting for a proper goodbye. Then I signed. One clean stroke, no hesitation, no tremor, no regret. All done. Harper smiled and extended his hand. "Congratulations, Mrs. Miller. Everything's official. Today marks your new beginning." I shook his hand and grinned. "I didn't lose a house, Mr. Harper. I just relocated my energy to a drama-free zone." We both laughed. I was folding family photos when I heard a car screech to a stop outside. Ethan burst through the door, his face flushed. Tina trailed behind him, looking frantic. "Mom, we heard you signed the papers. You can't do this." "Oh, darling, the law actually allows adults to sign their own property contracts. Isn't that fascinating?" Ethan slammed his hand on the table. "You're destroying this family." I turned and met his eyes. My voice wasn't loud, but every word landed squarely. "No, sweetheart, I'm just clearing out the rotten bricks." The air froze. Tina opened her mouth to speak, but I raised a hand. "Don't. Save your advice for the next episode of your life. I'm no longer playing the supporting role." Ethan clenched his fists, his lips trembling. For a fleeting second, I saw the little boy who once fell off his bike and cried for me to bandage his knee, but only for a second. The man standing before me wasn't that child anymore. He was someone who'd forgotten who taught him how to stand up. I picked up my small suitcase and smiled softly. "I still love you, Ethan. But love isn't a reason to stay miserable. Maybe one day you'll understand." Outside, the young couple who had bought the house had just arrived. They carried a bouquet of lavender and bright smiles. "Mrs. Miller, thank you so much. This house is beautiful. We'll take good care of it." "I'm sure you will," I said warmly. "It deserves to be filled with laughter, not arguments." Harper handed them the keys. The faint click of the lock sounded like a chapter closing. Oddly enough, I didn't feel sorrow, only peace. Maggie was waiting for me by the gate, leaning against her old silver car. She tilted her head and teased, "Ready for the great escape, Grace?" I laughed, pulling my suitcase toward her. "Escape sounds so tragic. Let's call it a long-term field trip." The car rolled forward, crunching over fallen maple leaves. The scent of damp earth drifted in through the open window, cool and fresh, like a promise. I didn't look around. I knew every corner of this street by heart, every fence, every porch, every window that had once been mine. But when we reached the crossroads, I couldn't resist glancing into the rearview mirror. The little house grew smaller and smaller until it faded, like an old photograph left too long in the sun. Quietly, I whispered to myself, I used to think I was leaving a family. Now I know. I'm just leaving the pain behind." Maggie turned, her eyes soft. "And what are you taking with you instead?" I leaned back in my seat, smiling. "Oh, just a list of good coffee shops, an emergency box of cookies, and a heart that's finally unafraid." As the afternoon light melted into gold, the road veered toward the coast. I rolled the window down, letting the salty wind rush in. Maggie turned on the radio. ABBA, of course. And without thinking, I sang along. "Take a chance, take a chance, take a chance on me." Two women's voices, free and laughing, danced in the wind. For the first time in years, my heart felt wide open. Not because I'd won anything, but because I'd chosen myself. Life, after all, is just a series of homes we outgrow in order to find the one inside us. And today, I left mine, without looking back, without resentment, just smiling. Like a woman who's finally slid her first pie of a new life into the oven. They say, when one door closes, a window opens. For me, that window was a tiny apartment by Lake Oswego, where morning mist floated like silk scarves and evening lights shimmered on the water like a handful of stars. The day I moved in, Maggie showed up with a bouquet of lavender and a grin of pure satisfaction. "This isn't just a home, Grace. This is your little empire of freedom." I laughed. "Sounds like the name of a senior rock band." The place was small, barely 40 square meters, with pale wooden floors, a window overlooking the lake, and a balcony just big enough for a few pots of flowers. I chose white orchids, pink geraniums, and a bit of mint. Every morning I watered them, inhaled the damp scent of soil, and brewed myself a cup of chamomile tea. I hung strands of soft yellow fairy lights around the window frame. At night, the glow washed over the walls like a quiet memory. In one corner of the living room sat my old armchair from the house I'd left behind. On the little wooden table beside it lay my brown leather journal, a purple pen, and a ceramic teacup. Then I opened my journal and wrote the first line of what I called the Freedom Diary. Day 1. No one's yelling. No one's borrowing money. No one's criticizing how I pour tea. Wonderful. I chuckled. It was without question the most honest happiness report I'd ever written. The next morning I walked around the lake. The maples were beginning to turn red. Elderly couples strolled their dogs, students jogged with earbuds in, and a few kids raced bicycles down the path, their laughter ringing like wind chimes. I caught myself smiling. No reason, no purpose. Just because the air was cool, the sun was kind, and I was still here. That afternoon, I signed up for a pottery class at the local art center. The instructor was a silver-haired man with round glasses and a voice as calm as wet clay. As I sat at the wheel, my hands covered in mud, I thought, who knew turning 60 could mean playing in the dirt legally? The clay was slick and soft, molding easily under my touch. I shaped a tiny cup, uneven but endearing. Just like me, I mused, not perfect, but still capable of holding something warm. That evening, I heard a knock on the door. I opened it to find a woman with a silver bun, wearing a teal sweater and holding a basket of apple tarts. "Hi, I'm Nora from next door. Heard you just moved in." I brought some pie. "Consider it your membership to the Independent Women's Association of this building." I burst out laughing and invited her in. Over tea, Nora told me she'd left her husband at 65 to go back to school for psychology. He said I was crazy. She chuckled. I told him, yes, crazy about understanding myself after 40 years of understanding everyone else. I liked her immediately. That night, we sat by the window sharing pie and stories. She told me about how the college kids stare when she raises her hand in class, and I told her how I sold my house for mental health reasons. We laughed so hard that even the wind outside must have wondered what two newly liberated women found so funny. From that day on, my life found a rhythm. 6 a.m. Water orchids, brew tea. 8 a.m. Walk around the lake greeting strangers with, "Have a less complicated day." 10 a.m. Pottery class. Occasionally, I'd make vases so crooked that my instructor apologized on behalf of the wheel. Afternoon, read on the balcony, letting sunlight flicker through the leaves. Evening, cocoa with Nora, talking about the world and our back pain. One afternoon, I paused in the park, watching children laugh until their little bodies shook with delight. And suddenly, I understood something. Every stranger's smile was quietly filling the empty spaces in my heart. Not because I'd forgotten the past, but because I'd stopped letting it take up all the room. Still, there were evenings when I sat by the lake watching ripples spread and thought of Ethan. Was he well? Was he still angry? Then I'd make myself another cup of tea. Sip slowly and whisper, "My son was once the sunshine of my life." But when the sun burns too hot, you learn to find shade. The words sounded both sad and freeing, but I didn't resent him. I only hoped that one day he'd understand. His mother didn't leave because she stopped loving him. She left because she finally learned what real love for herself looked like. That night, Nora knocked again, pressing a small notebook into my hands. "Write something every day that makes you smile," she said. So I did, entry 1. A little girl in pottery class told me I have beautiful hands. I told her, "Thank you." They used to slap life around a bit. Now they just mold happiness. I laughed out loud, then caught sight of my reflection in the window, a face with a few more wrinkles but eyes that shone brighter than ever. I realized something simple but true. I'm not completely healed yet, but I'm walking in the right direction. And maybe that's all a once broken heart ever needs to do. Just keep walking until it learns to bloom again. It's been a year since I left that wooden house in Portland, the one filled with arguments, burnt pies, and a few forged papers. Now I live among birdsong and the scent of chamomile tea. Every morning, Lake Oswego lies still as a mirror, and in that reflection I see a silver-haired woman who's no longer a victim of misplaced love, but someone truly free. In October, the community center launched a program for seniors, and of course, Nora convinced me to teach a positive journaling class. "You're already an expert, Grace," she said. "I've seen you write notes that make even sadness sound witty." And just like that, I said yes. For the first session, I set up a big tea table, mint tea, butter cookies, and a whiteboard that read, "Tea and Story. Every tale is a warm cup of tea." My students were a delightful mix. Mrs. Jones, a cat enthusiast, Mr. Raymond, who loved complaining about local politics, and an 80-year-old lady named Lily, who napped through half the class but always woke up in time to ask for more cookies. I began with a cheerful smile. "Journaling isn't for complaining," I said. "It's for collecting proof that we're still alive and still capable of laughter." A man raised his hand. "What if there's nothing happy to write about?" "Then write this," I grinned. "Today, I still have enough teeth to chew cookies." That's a perfectly valid joy. The room was filled with laughter. I poured more tea, the scent of mint and cinnamon rising like comfort itself. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was brewing happiness instead of surviving it. One afternoon, Mrs. Jones, the kind of woman who asks questions that make you sip tea before answering, tilted her head and asked, "Grace, how do you not hate your son?" If I were you, I'd have cut him off completely. The room went quiet. I set the teapot down, looking out the window where maple leaves danced in the wind. "Oh, that's easy," I said lightly. "Every morning I look in the mirror and tell myself, 'You look prettier when you're not frowning.'" Everyone laughed, but then fell silent again, because they knew I wasn't just joking. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't about whether someone deserves it. It's about giving yourself permission to feel lighter. Then, one November morning, an envelope arrived. The handwriting was familiar, Ethan Miller. My hands trembled just a little. I brewed some tea, set the letter beside it, and took a deep breath before opening it. Mom, I don't know where to start. I'm sorry. Not just for what I said, but for making you leave just to find peace. You once told me, when you grow up, I only hope you learn to love without hurting others. I failed, but I'm trying. Tina and I are separated now, and I've learned a lot. If you'll let me, I'd like to visit, not to ask for anything, just to see that you're okay. I love you. Ethan. I read it twice. No tears. Just a soft warmth blooming in my chest, like morning light brushing the edge of my heart. I opened my journal and wrote, I forgive him. But I won't go back to that house. I already have a place called peace. Then I folded the letter and placed it in a wooden box beside a photo of Ethan as a child, smiling, with ice cream all over his face. Life went on. My tea and story class grew into a gathering where people laughed at their past instead of mourning it. Mrs. Jones started writing her memoirs. Mr. Raymond adopted a cat, even though he used to say he hated them more than taxes. And me, I taught them how to fall back in love with themselves. One afternoon, I poured another pot of chamomile and told my students, happiness isn't about having permission to be at peace. It's realizing you never needed anyone's permission in the first place. Someone clapped. Someone else laughed. And for the first time, I felt my heart blossom. Quietly, gently, like steam rising from a teacup. That day, autumn was glorious in Portland. I took a walk by the lake, the wind tugging playfully at my silver hair, the scent of dry leaves mingling with cinnamon from the cafe across the street. The lake mirrored the honey-colored sky. I stood there holding my teacup, smiling to myself. There are things you only understand once you stand up and walk away, I whispered. For me, it was learning how to live, without asking for anyone's permission. A gust of wind swept past, lifting a few loose strands of my hair. Somewhere in the distance, children were laughing, bright, carefree, endless. And I realized I'd come full circle, from pain to peace, from tears to stillness. There was no anger left, no need to prove anything, just a cup of tea, a few good friends, and a heart that knew how to smile again. End of year one journal. Today I've officially become the best version of myself. Not a wife, not a mother, not even a teacher, just Grace Miller. A woman who finally understands that happiness isn't found in the place you stay, but in the courage it takes to leave. As the sun sank behind the lake, golden light filled my eyes, and I knew I was truly home. Not in a house with wooden walls and white paint, but in the quiet, uncluttered space inside my heart. I raised my teacup, took one last sip. The tea was still warm, and so was I,